Greetings, class. Just want to take a minute to outline some things of importance in chapters 4 and 5. In chapter 4, we cover or read about the state and federal regulations which guide how and what we do in our work. Every medical professional has rules to follow. The important thing to remember about the rules of our state are that you want to practice within the scope of your training and do things legally according to the state guidelines or the state medical practice acts for your particular job. Another thing to remember is that you can't let your personal feelings about certain subjects like abortion interfere with your care of patients. Our patients deserve to be cared for without bias or prejudice. So if you find it hard to care for patients perhaps seeking abortion when you don't believe in abortion, then you may need to find another job because, again, the patients deserve to be treated with respect and without bias or prejudice. Confidentiality is another important aspect of our work. My saying is, loose lips sink ships. Breaking a patient's confidentiality will help you lose your job. This is something you don't want to do. It is very important to respect a patient's confidentiality. If you happen to see your neighbor or someone from your church or even your worst enemy in your medical office, you are not entitled to looking at their medical records unless you're actually actively involved in their care. So if they happen to be in your office that day, but someone else is taking care of them, you can't just sneak a look at their records when they leave to see what they were seen for. This would be considered a breach of their confidentiality. In chapter 5, we have a famous quote from Thomas Paine. The quote is, "Character is much easier kept than recovered." I think this is a very important quote because it shows that when the office has a good reputation to start with, you don't want to do anything that might jeopardize the reputation of the office, of the physicians, and other people that work in the office. Professional liability is an important topic for all healthcare professionals. Professional liability coverage or insurance is one of the largest expenses that physicians have in maintaining their office. Risk management practices in caring for patients and having good work habits in the office will help the office stay in a position of not being litigated or sued by patients. If you see something unsafe in the office, that way, for example, a carpet that someone might trip on or water spilt on the floor that doesn't get cleaned up, that opens the office to the potential of getting sued by someone falling and hurting themselves or tripping, that kind of thing. Some of the other key terms in the chapter are breach of contract. Breach of contract means that the contract between two parties, typically the physician and the patient, is breached in some capacity by either party. The patient can breach a contract by way of not paying their bill or not following medical advice, which then in turn might force the physician to want to drop the patient as their client. Physician abandonment of patient is another key term to remember. A physician would never want to be considered abandoning patients. If they feel they cannot keep the patient in their practice, then they need to give due notice to the patient in writing with typically 30 days notice to find another physician to care for them. The letter that you would send to the patient would outline why we are not keeping them as a patient, the amount of time they have to find another physician, an offer for medical records to be forwarded to their new physician. And this letter would be sent certified mail, return receipt requested, so that we know the patient has received the letter. The return receipt from the post office would be kept in their file just like a copy of the letter would be. What we want to always recognize in our practice as a healthcare professional is the standard of care. The standard of care is determined by the state's Medical Practice Acts, which state that for a physician you will do certain things as a physician, and your standard of care is much higher than that of a medical assistant. So a medical assistant practicing in the office would have a standard of care comparing them to other medical assistants of similar training and experience. So the important thing to remember is that you always want to practice within the standard of care for your training and under the state's guidelines of Medical Practice Acts. The next term I wanted to go over with you was negligence. Negligence means that something in the care of the patient has gone wrong and the patient has been hurt by the provider's negligence. Medical professionals, such as physicians, can be accused of negligence by way of something going wrong during a surgery, perhaps, whereas a medical assistant working in the office could be accused of negligence by not following through with a procedure, missing a step along the way kind of thing, in following the prescribed treatment that the physician wanted to have happen. The term tort means that there has been an act, either intentional or unintentional, that is an important thing to keep in mind. Most of the time, a patient will get hurt by way of an unintentional tort. So you didn't plan on them being hurt, but there still was an injury, which then the patient could potentially sue us or sue the practice. Sue us personally as medical assistants if we were the one that caused the mistake, as well as the practice. The thing to keep in mind if you've been accused of negligence is that the patient's attorney would have to prove the 4 Ds, and this is outlined on page 67 in the book. So the 4 Ds, we had a duty to treat. They were a patient of record. The next D is derelict. So something in the duty to treat went wrong. We were derelict in the duty, and something went wrong in the course of the care we were giving. The next D is direct cause. Direct cause means that there isn't any other way that the patient was hurt than the treatment that we provided and the resulting injury. And then the last D is damages, where if there's some sort of injury that has to be remedied, perhaps the patient needs surgery or some sort of treatment from another provider to overcome the injury that we caused, then of course that has to be paid for. And so damages is typically monetary compensation so that the patient can recover or be treated by another person to get over their injury. The last term I wanted to go over was respondent superior. Let the master answer. This is a very important term for medical assistants to be aware of because as we are not licensed in any state, we are operating or practicing under the physician's license who employs us. So this is very important. You don't ever want to jeopardize your job or jeopardize the physician's license by doing something incorrectly. This is why physicians will want to hire the most highly trained, capable employees to have in the office, because that way their license isn't potentially in jeopardy by employees not knowing how to do their job.